Chapter 24 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain, and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain, and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranstoun, Metcalfe. Chapter 24 Under Lock and Key. After the preliminary examination as to his identity and so on, Gurn had been transferred to the Santé prison. At first the prisoner seemed to have terrible difficulty in accustoming himself to the rigours of confinement. He suffered from alternate paroxysms of rage and despair, but by sheer strength of character he fought these down. As a prisoner on remand, he was entitled to the privilege of a separate cell. Also, during the first 48 hours, he had been able to have his meals sent in from outside. Since then, however, his money had given out, and he was obliged to content himself with the ordinary prison dietary. But Gurn was not fastidious. This man whom Lady Beltham had singled out or accepted as her lover had often given proofs of an education and an intelligence above the average, yet now he appeared quite at ease in the atmosphere of a prison. Gurn was walking quickly and alone round the exercise yard, when a breathless voice sounded in his ear. "God, Gurn, you know how to march! I was going to join you for a bit, but I could not keep up with you." Gurn turned and saw old Siegenthal, the warder in charge of his division, in whose custody he was particularly placed. "My word!" the old fellow panted. "Anybody could tell you had been in the infantry. Well, so have I, though that wasn't yesterday, nor yet the day before, but we never marched as fast as you do. We made a fine march once, though, at Saint Privat." Out of pity for the decent old fellow, Gurn slackened his pace. He had heard the story of the Battle of Saint Privat a dozen times already, but he was quite willing to let Siegenthal tell it again. The warder, however, wandered to another point. "By the way, I heard you were promoted sergeant out in the Transvaal, is that so?" And as Gurn nodded assent, he went on. "I never rose above the rank of corporal, but at any rate I have always led an honest life." A sudden compassion for his prisoner seized the old man, and he laid a kindly hand on Gurn's shoulder. "Is it really possible that an old soldier like you, who seem to be such a steady, serious kind of man, can have committed such a crime?" Gurn dropped his eyes and did not reply. "I suppose there was a woman at the bottom of it," Siegenthal said tentatively. "You acted on impulse, in a fit of jealousy, eh?" "No," Gurn answered with sudden bluntness. "I may as well own up that I did it in anger, because I wanted money, for the sake of robbery." "I'm sorry," said the old warder simply. "You must have been desperately hard up." "No, I wasn't." Siegenthal stared at his prisoner. The man must be utterly callous to talk like that, he thought. Then a clock struck, and the warder gave a curt order. "Time, Gurn, we must go back." And he conducted the unresisting prisoner up the 3 flights of stairs that led to the division in which his cell was. "By the way," he remarked as they went, "I forgot to tell you that you and I have got to part." "Oh," said Gurn, "am I to be transferred to another prison?" "No, it is I who am going. Just fancy, I have been appointed head warder at Poissy. I go on leave tonight and take up my new post in a week." Both halted before the door of cell number 127. "In with you," said Siegenthal, and when Gurn had obeyed he turned to go. Then he wheeled round again quickly and put out his hand hurriedly, as if half afraid of being seen. "Put it there, Gurn," he said. "No doubt you are a murderer, and, as you have confessed yourself, a thief, but I can't forget that if you had kept straight you were the sergeant, and I should have to obey you. I'm sorry for you." Gurn was touched, and murmured a word of thanks. That's all right, Siegenthal muttered, not attempting to hide his emotion. "Let us hope that everything will turn out well," and he left Gurn alone in the cell to his meditations. Twice, Gurn reflected, relying on the sympathy which he knew he had evoked in the old warder's heart, despite the number of criminals who had passed through his hands, he had been on the point of broaching a serious and delicate matter to him, but he had not actually spoken, being deterred by some undefinable scruple, as well as half suspecting that his application would be made in vain. And now he was glad he had been so cautious, for even if the warder had been amenable, his approaching removal to another prison would have prevented the idea from coming to fruition. A sing-song voice echoed in the corridor. "Number 127, you are wanted in the barrister's room. Get ready." And the next minute the door of the cell was thrown open, and a cheery-looking warder, with a strong Gascon accent, appeared. Gurn had noticed him before. He was the second warder in this division, a man named Nibet, and no doubt he would be promoted to Siegenthal's place when the chief warder left. Nibet looked curiously at Gurn, a certain sympathy in his quick brown eyes. "Ready, Gurn?" Gurn growled an answer and pulled on his coat again. His counsel was Maître Barbereau, one of the foremost criminal barristers of the day. Gurn had thought it prudent to retain him for his defence, most especially as it would cost him nothing personally. But he had no particular desire to talk to him now. He had already told him everything he intended to tell him, and he had no intention of allowing the case to be boomed as a sensation. Quite the reverse, indeed. In his opinion, the flatter the case fell, the better it would be for his interests, though no doubt Maître Barbereau would not be of the same way of thinking. But he said nothing, and merely walked in front of Nibet along the corridor toward the barrister's room, the way to which he was already familiar with. On the way they passed some masons who were at work in the prison, and these men stopped to watch him pass, but contrary to Gurn's apprehensions they did not seem to recognise him. He hoped it meant that the murder was already ceasing to be a 9 days' wonder for the public at large. Nibet pushed Gurn into the barrister's room, saying respectfully to the person in it already, "You have only to ring, sir, when you have finished," and then withdrew, leaving Gurn in presence not of his counsel, as he had expected, but of that personage's assistant, a young licentiate in law named Roger de Serres, who was also a most incredible dandy. Roger de Serres greeted Gurn with an engaging smile, and advanced as if to shake hands with him, but suddenly wondering whether that action might not suggest undue familiarity, he raised his hand to his own head instead and scratched it. The young fellow was still younger in his business, and did not rightly know whether it was etiquette for a barrister, or even a barrister's junior, to shake hands with a prisoner who was implicated in a notorious murder. Gurn felt inclined to laugh, and on the whole was glad that it was the junior whom he had to see. The futile verbosity of this very young licentiate might possibly be amusing. Maître Roger de Serres began with civil apologies. "You will excuse me if I only stay for a few minutes, but I am most frightfully busy. Besides, 2 ladies are waiting for me outside in my carriage. I may say confidentially that they are actresses, old friends of mine, and, just fancy, they are most frightfully anxious to see you. That's what it means to be famous, Monsieur Gurn, eh, what?" Gurn nodded, not feeling unduly flattered. Roger de Serres continued, "Just to please them, I have made any number of applications to the governor of the prison, but there was nothing doing, my dear chap. That beast of a magistrate, Fuselier, insists on your being kept in absolute seclusion. But none the less, I've got some news for you. I know heaps. Why, my friends at the law courts call me the peripatetic paragraph. Not bad, eh, what?" Gurn smiled, and Roger de Serres was encouraged. "It's given me no end of a boom, my leader acting for you, and my being able to come and see you whenever I like. Everybody asks me how you are, and what you are like, and what you say, and what you think. You can congratulate yourself on having caused a sensation in Paris." Gurn began to be irritated by all this chatter. "I must confess I'm not the least interested in what people are saying about me. Is there anything new in my case?" "Absolutely nothing that I am aware of," Roger de Serres replied serenely, without stopping to think whether there was or not. "I say, Lady Beltham—" "Yes," said Gurn. "Well, I know her very well, you know. I go out a frightful lot, and I have often met her. A charming woman, Lady Beltham." Gurn really did not know how to treat the idiot. Never one to suffer fools gladly, he grew irritable and would almost certainly have said something that would have put the garrulous young bungler in his place, had not the latter suddenly remembered something, just as he was on the point of getting up to go. "Oh, by the way," he said with a laugh, "I was nearly forgetting the most important thing of all. Just fancy that beast Juve, the marvellous detective whom the newspapers rave about, went to your place yesterday afternoon to make another official search." "Alone?" inquired Gurn, much interested. "Quite alone. Now what do you suppose he found? The place had been ransacked dozens of times, you know. Of course, I mean something sensational in the way of a find. I bet you 1,000—" "I never bet," Gurn snapped. "Tell me at once what it was." The young fellow was proud of having caught the attention of his leader's notorious client, if only for a moment. He paused and wagged his head, weighing each word to give them greater emphasis. "He found an ordnance map in your bookcase, my dear chap. An ordnance map with a bit torn out of it." "Oh, and what then?" said Gurn, a frown upon his face. The young barrister did not notice the expression on the murderer's countenance. "Well, then it appears that Juve thought it was very important. Between you and me, my opinion is that Juve tries to be frightfully clever and succeeds in looking a fool. How, I ask you, can the discovery of that map affect your case or influence the decision of the jury? By the way, there is no need for you to worry about the result. I have had a frightful lot of experience in criminal cases, and so be assured that you are all right. Extenuating circumstances, you know. But, oh, yes, there is one thing more I wanted to tell you. A fresh witness is going to be called at the examination. Let me see, what was his name? Dollon, that's it, the steward Dollon." "I don't understand," said Gurn. His head was bent and his eyes cast down. A glimmer of light dawned in the young licentiate's brain. "Wait, there is some connection," he said. "The steward Dollon is in the employment of a lady who calls herself the Baronne de Vibray, and the Baronne de Vibray is a guardian to the young lady who was staying with Lady Beltham the day, or rather the night, when well, you know. And that young lady, Mademoiselle Thérèse Auvernois, was placed with Lady Beltham by Monsieur Etienne Rambert, and Monsieur Etienne Rambert is the father of the young man who murdered the Marquise de Langrune last year. I tell you all these things without attempting to draw any deductions from them, for my own part, I haven't the least idea why the steward Dollon has been summoned in our case at all." "Nor have I," said Gurn, and the frown on his brow was deeper. Roger de Seras hunted all round the little room for his gloves and found them in his pocket. "Well, my dear chap, I must leave you. We have been chatting for a whole half hour, and those ladies are still waiting for me. What on earth will they say to me?" He was about to ring for the warder, when Gurn abruptly stayed him. "Tell me," he said with a sudden air of interest, "when is that man coming? What's his name? Dollon?" The young barrister was on the point of saying he did not know, when a brilliant recollection came into his mind. "Gad, how frightfully stupid I am! Why, I have a copy of the telegram he sent to the magistrate in my portfolio here now." He opened the portfolio and picked out a sheet of blue paper. "Here it is." Gurn took it from him and read: "Will leave Verrières tomorrow evening by 7:20 train, arriving Paris 5 a.m." Gurn appeared to be sufficiently edified. At all events he paid no attention to the rest of the message. Lord Beltham's murderer handed the document back to the barrister without a word. A few minutes later, Maître Roger de Seras had joined his lady friends, and the prisoner was once more in his cell. End of chapter 24. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com. Chapter 25 of Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranstoun, Metcalfe. Chapter 25. An Unexpected Accomplice. Gurn was walking nervously up and down in his cell after this interview, when the door was pushed open and the cheery face of the warder Nibet looked in. "Evening, Gurn," he said. "It's 6 o'clock, and the restaurant keeper opposite wants to know if he is to send your dinner in to you." "No," Gurn growled, "I'll have the prison ordinary." "Oh ho!" said the warder. "Funds low, eh? Of course it's not for you to despise our dietary, but still, government beans!" He came further into the cell, ignoring Gurn's impatient preference for his room to his company, and said in a low tone, "There, Take that," and thrust a banknote into the hand of the dumbfounded prisoner. "And if you want any more, they will be forthcoming," he added. He made a sign to Gurn to say nothing, and went to the door. "I'll be back in a few minutes. I'll just go and order a decent dinner for you." Gurn felt as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from him. The cell seemed larger, the prison walls less high. He had an intuition that Lady Beltham was not deserting him. He had never doubted the sincerity of her feelings for him, but he quite realised how a woman in her delicate position might feel embarrassed in trying to intervene in favour of any prisoner, and much more so in the case of one whom the entire world believed to be the single-handed murderer of her husband. But now Lady Beltham had intervened. She had succeeded in communicating with him through the medium of the warder, and almost certainly she would do much more. The door opened again, and the warder entered, carrying a long rush basket containing several dishes and a bottle of wine. "Well, Gurn, that's a more agreeable sort of dinner, eh?" "Gad, I wanted it after all," said the murderer with a smile. "It was a good idea of yours, Monsieur Nibet, to insist on my getting my dinner sent in from outside." Nibet winked. He appreciated his prisoner's tact. Obviously he was not one to make untimely allusions to the warder's breach of discipline in conveying money to him so simply, but so very irregularly. As he ate, Gurn chatted with Nibet. "I suppose it is you who will get Siegenthal's place?" "Yes," said Nibet, sipping the wine Gurn had offered him. "I have asked for the berth no end of times, but it never came. I was always told to wait because the place was not free, and another berth must be found first for Siegenthal, who is my senior. But the old beast would never make any application. However, 3 days ago I was sent for to the ministry, and one of the staff told me that someone in the embassy, or the government, or somewhere, was taking an interest in me, and they asked me a lot of questions, and I told them all about it. And then, all of a sudden, Siegenthal gets promoted to Poissy, and I was given his billet here." Gurn nodded. He saw light. "And what about the money?" "That's stranger still, but I understood all the same. A lady met me in the street the other night and spoke to me by name. We had a chat there on the pavement, for the street was empty, and she shoved some banknotes into my hand, not just 1 or 2, but a great bunch, and she told me that she was interested in me, in you, and that if things turned out as she wished, there were plenty more banknotes where those came from." While the warder was talking, Gurn watched him carefully. The murderer was an experienced reader of character and faces, and he speedily realised that his lady's choice had fallen on an excellent object. Thick lips, a narrow forehead, and prominent cheekbones suggested a material nature that would hesitate at nothing which would satisfy his carnal appetites. So Gurn decided that further circumlocution was so much waste of time, and that he might safely come to the point. He laid his hand familiarly on the warder's shoulder. "I'm getting sick of being here," he remarked. "I dare say," the warder answered uneasily, "but you must be guided by reason. Time is going on and things arrange themselves." "They do when you help them," Gurn said peremptorily, "and you and I are going to help them." "That remains to be seen," said the warder. "Of course everything has got to be paid for," Gurn went on. "One can't expect a warder to risk his situation merely to help a prisoner to escape." He smiled as the warder made an exclamation of nervous warning. "Don't be frightened, Nibet. We're not going to play any fool games, but let us talk seriously. Of course you have another appointment with the worthy lady who gave you that money?" "I am to meet her tonight at 11 in the Boulevard Arago," Nibet said after a moment's hesitation. "Good," said Gurn. "Well, you are to tell her that I must have 10,000 francs." "What?" exclaimed the man in utter astonishment, but his eyes shone with greed. 10,000 francs, Gurn repeated calmly, "and by tomorrow morning. 1,500 of those are for you. I will go away tomorrow evening." There was a tense silence. The warder seemed doubtful, and Gurn turned the whole of his will power upon him to persuade him. "Suppose they suspect me?" said Nibet. "Idiot!" Gurn retorted. "All you will do will be to make a slip in your duty. I don't want you to be an accomplice. Listen, there will be another 5,000 francs for you, and if things turn out awkwardly for you, all you will have to do will be to go across to England and live there comfortably for the rest of your days." The warder was obviously almost ready to comply. "Who will guarantee me?" he asked. "The lady. I tell you, the lady of the Boulevard Arago. Here, give her this." And he tore a leaf out of his pocketbook, and scribbling a few words on it, handed it to Nibet. "Well," said the warder hesitantly, "I don't say no." "You've got to say yes," Gurn retorted. The two looked steadily in each other's eyes, then the warder blanched. "Yes," he said. Nibet was going away, and was already almost in the corridor when Gurn calmly called him back. "You will evolve a plan, and I will start tomorrow. Don't forget to bring me a timetable. The Orleans Company timetable will do." The murderer was not disappointed in his expectations. The next morning Nibet appeared with a mysterious face and eager eyes. He took a small bundle from underneath his jersey and gave it to Gurn. "Hide that in your bed," he said, and Gurn obeyed. The morning passed without further developments. Numerous warders came and went in the corridor, attending to the prisoners, and Gurn could get no private talk with Nibet, who contrived, however, to come into his cell several times on various pretexts, and assure him with a nod or a word that all was going well. But presently, when walking in the exercise yard, the two men were able to have a conversation. Nibet manifested an intelligence of which his outer appearance gave no indication, but it seems to be an established fact that the inventive faculties, even of men of inferior mental quality, are sharpened when they are engaged in mischief. "For the last 3 weeks," he said, "about a score of masons have been working in the prison, repairing the roof and doing up some of the cells. Cell number 129, the one next yours, is empty, and there are no bars on the window. The masons go through that cell and that window to get on to the roof. They knock off work soon after 6 o'clock. The gatekeeper knows them all, but he does not always look closely at their faces when they go by, and you might be able to go out with them. In the bundle that I gave you there is a pair of workman's trousers, and a waistcoat and a felt hat. Put those on. At about 5:45, the men who went up onto the roof through the cell come down by way of the skylights to the staircase that leads to the clerk's office, pass the office, where they are asked no questions, cross the 2 yards and go out by the main gate. I will open the door of your cell a few minutes before 6, and you must go into the empty cell next yours, slip up onto the roof, and take care to hide behind the chimney stacks until the men have done work. Let them go down in front of you, and follow behind with a pick or a shovel on your shoulder, and when you are passing the clerk, or anywhere where you might be observed, mind you let the men go a yard or 2 in front of you. When the gate is just being shut after that last workman, call out quietly, but as naturally as you can, 'Hold on, Monsieur Morin. Mind you don't lock me in. I'm not one of your lodgers. Let me out after my mates.' Make some joke of that sort, and when you are once outside the gate, by George, my boy, you'll have to vamoose." Gurn listened attentively to the warder's instructions. Lady Beltham must indeed have been generous and have made the man perfectly easy on the score of his own future. "In one of the pockets of the clothes," Nibet went on, "I have put 10 100-franc notes. You asked for more, but I could not raise it. We can settle that some other time." Gurn made no comment. "When will my escape be discovered?" he asked. "I'm on night duty," the warder answered. "Arrange your clothes on your bed to make it look as if you were in bed, and then they will think I might have been deceived. I go off duty at 5. The next round is at 8. My mate will open the door of the cage, and by that time you will be miles away." Gurn nodded comprehension. Time did not permit of longer conversation. The bell had rung some minutes ago, proclaiming that the exercise time was over. The two men hurried upstairs to cell number 127 on the 3rd floor, and the prisoner was locked in alone, while Nibet went about his duty as usual. End of chapter 25. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com 26 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranstoun, Metcalfe. Chapter 26. A Mysterious Crime. Arriving in good time at the little station at Verrières, where he was about to take a train to Paris to keep his appointment at the law courts, the old steward Allain gave his parting instructions to his two children who had come to see him off. "I must, of course, call upon Mme. de Vibray," he said, "and I don't yet know what time M. Fuselier wants to see me at his office. Anyhow, if I don't come back tomorrow, I will the next day, without fail. Well, little ones, I'm just off now, so say good-bye and get home as fast as you can. It looks to me as if there was going to be a storm, and I should like to know that you were safe at home." With heavy creaking of iron wheels and hoarse blowing off of steam from the engine, the Paris train drew into the station. The steward gave a final kiss to his little son and daughter, and got into a second-class carriage. In a neighbouring village a clock had just struck 3. The storm had been raging since early in the evening, but now it seemed informed with a fresh fury. The rain was lashing down more fiercely, and the wind was blowing harder still, making the slender poplars along the railway line bow and bend before the squalls, and assume the most fantastic shapes, but vaguely shone against the night. The night was inky black. The keenest eye could make out nothing at all distinctly, even at the distance of a few yards. The darkness was so dense as to seem absolutely solid. Nevertheless, along the railway embankment a man was making his way with steady step, seeming not a whit disturbed by the tragic horror of the storm. He was a man of about 30, rather well dressed in a large waterproof coat, the collar of which, turned up to his ears, hid the lower part of his face, and a big felt hat with brim turned down protecting him fairly well from the worst of the weather. The man fought his way against the wind, which drove into his overcoat with such force that sometimes it almost stopped his progress, and he trod the stony track without paying heed to the sorry plight into which it would most surely put the thin boots he was wearing. "Awful weather," he growled. "I don't remember such a shocking night for years. Wind, rain, every conceivable thing. But I mustn't grumble, for the total absence of moon will be uncommonly useful for my purpose." A flash of lightning streaked the horizon, and the man stopped and looked quickly about him. "I can't be far from the place," he thought, and again went on his way. Presently he heaved a sigh of relief. "Here I am at last." At this spot the line was completely enclosed between two high slopes, or ran at the bottom of a deep cutting. "It's better here," the man said to himself. "The wind passes well above my head, and the cutting gives good shelter." He stopped and carefully deposited on the ground a rather bulky bundle he had been carrying under his arm. Then he began to pace up and down, stamping his feet in an effort to keep warm. "It has just struck 3, he muttered. "From the timetable I can't expect anything for another 10 minutes. Well, better too soon than too late." He contemplated the bundle which he had laid down a few minutes before. "It's heavier than I thought, and deucedly in the way, but it was absolutely necessary to bring it. And down here in this cutting there is nothing for me to be anxious about. The grass is thick, so I can run, and the line is so straight that I shall see the lights of the train a long way off." A thin smile curled his lips. "Who would have thought, when I was in America, that I should ever find it so useful to have learnt how to jump a train?" A dull sound in the distance caught his ear. In a second he had sprung to his bundle, picked it up, and choosing a spot on the ballast, crouched down listening. At the place where he stood the line ran up a steep acclivity. It was from the lower end of this that the noise he had heard proceeded, and now was growing louder, almost deafening. It was the heavy regular puffing of a powerful engine coming up a steep gradient under full steam. "No mistake, my star is with me," the man muttered, and as the train approached he stretched his muscles, and taking a firmer grip of his bundle he bent forward in the stooping attitude that runners take when about to start off in a race. With a heavy roar, and enveloped in clouds of steam, the train came up to where he was, travelling slowly because of the steep gradient, certainly less than 20 miles an hour. The moment the engine had passed him, the man started off, lithe as a cat, and ran at the top of his speed. The train, of course, gained upon him. The tender, luggage vans, and third-class carriages passed him, and a second-class carriage was just coming up with him. The pace alone would have deprived almost anyone else of power and thought, but this man was evidently a first-rate athlete. For the moment he caught sight of the second-class carriage he took his decision. With a tremendous effort he caught hold of the handrail and sprang upon the footboard, where with extraordinary skill he contrived to remain. Reaching the summit of the slope, the train gathered speed, and with an even louder roar began its headlong journey through the darkness and the storm, which seemed to increase in intensity with every passing minute. For a few seconds the man hung on where he was. Then, when he had regained his breath, he got on to the upper step and listened at the door of the corridor at which he found himself. "No one there," he muttered. "Besides, everyone will be asleep." And chancing everything, he rose up, opened the door, and stepped into the second-class carriage with a grunt of relief. Making no attempt to conceal himself, he walked boldly into the lavatory and washed his face that was blackened with the smoke from outside, and then in the most leisurely, natural way possible, he came out of the lavatory and walked along the corridor, soliloquizing aloud, manifestly not minding whether he were overheard. "It's positively maddening. No one can sleep with travelling companions like that." As he spoke he went along the corridor, rapidly glancing into every compartment. In one, 3 men were asleep, obviously unaware that anyone was surveying them from outside. The door of the compartment was ajar, and the stranger noiselessly stepped within. The fourth corner was unoccupied, and here the man took his seat, laying his bundle down beside him and feigning sleep. He waited motionless for a good quarter of an hour, until he was quite satisfied that his companions were really sleeping soundly. Then he slid his hand into the bundle by his side, seemed to be doing something inside it, then withdrew his hand noiselessly, stepped out of the compartment, and carefully closed the door. In the corridor he drew a sigh of relieved satisfaction and took a cigar from his pocket. "Everything is going splendidly," he said to himself. "I was cursing this awful storm just now, but it is wonderfully useful to me. On such a night as this, no one would dream of opening the windows." He strolled up and down, holding on to the handrail with one hand to maintain himself against the rocking of the train, and every now and then taking out his watch with the other to see the time. "I haven't too much time," he muttered. "I shall have to be quick, or my friend will miss his train." He smiled as if amused at the idea, and then holding his cigar away from him so as not to inhale the smoke, he drew several deep breaths. "There is a faint smell," he said, "but you would have to be told of it to detect it. The devil of it is that it so often causes nightmare. That would be awful." He suspended his patrol and listened again. There was no sound to be heard from within the compartments except the snoring of a few travellers and the monotonous rhythmical noise of the wheels passing over the joints of the rails. "Come, I've waited 20 minutes. It would be risky to wait longer. Let's get to work." He stepped briskly back into the compartment, and furtively glancing into the corridor to make sure that no one was there, he went across to the opposite window and opened it wide. He put his head out into the air for a minute or two, and then turned to examine his travelling companions. All 3 were still sound asleep. The man gave vent to a dry chuckle. He drew his bundle towards him, felt until he found something within it, and flung it back onto the seat. Then he walked up to the man opposite, slipped his hand inside his coat, and abstracted a pocketbook and began to examine the papers it contained. "Ah!" he exclaimed suddenly, "that was what I was afraid of." And taking one of the papers, he put it inside his own pocketbook, chose one from his own and put it into the other man's pocketbook, and then, having effected the exchange, replaced the man's property and chuckled again. "You do sleep." And indeed, although the pickpocket took no particular precaution, the man continued to sleep soundly, as did the other 2 men in the compartment. The thief looked once more at his watch. Time. He leaned out of the open window and slipped back the safety catch. Then he opened the door quite wide, took the sleeping traveller by the shoulders and picked him up from the seat, and with all his strength sent him rolling out onto the line. The next moment he seized from the rack the light articles that evidently belonged to his victim and threw them out after him. When he had finished his ghastly work he rubbed his hands in satisfaction. "Good," he said, and closing the door again, but leaving the window open, he left the compartment, not troubling to pick up his belongings, and walked along the corridors to another second-class compartment toward the front of the train, at which he calmly installed himself. "Luck has been with me," he muttered, as he stretched himself out on the seat. "Everything has gone off well. No one has seen me, and those 2 fools who might have upset my plans will wake up quite naturally when they begin to feel the cold, and they will attribute the headache they will probably feel to their tiring journey." A train, travelling in the opposite direction, suddenly roared past the window and made him jump. He started up and smiled. "Gad, I said my friend would miss his train, but he'll catch it in another 5 minutes. In another 5 minutes, luggage and body and the entire caboodle will be mincemeat." And as if completely reassured by the idea, he chuckled again. "Nothing could have gone better. I can have a rest, and in an hour's time I shall be at Juvisy, where, thanks to my forethought, I shall be able to whitewash myself, literally." One thing, however, still seemed to worry him. He did not know exactly where on the line he had thrown his unhappy victim, but he had an idea that the train had run through a small station shortly afterwards. If that was so, the body might be found sooner than he would have liked. He tried to dismiss the notion from his mind, but he caught sight of the telegraph posts speeding past the windows, and he shook his fist at them malignantly. "That is the only thing that can harm me now," he muttered. "Juvisy, Juvisy, wait here 2 minutes." It was barely 6:30, and the porters hurried along the train, calling out the name of the station and rousing sleepy travellers from their dreams. A man jumped nimbly out of a second-class carriage and walked toward the exit from the station, holding out his ticket. "Season," he said, and passed out quickly. Good idea, that season ticket, he said to himself. Much less dangerous than an ordinary ticket which the police could have traced. He walked briskly towards the subway, crossed the main road, and took a side turning that led down towards the Seine. Taking no notice of the mud, the man went into a field and hid himself in a little thicket on the river bank. He looked carefully all around him to make sure he was unobserved, then took off his overcoat, jacket and trousers, and drawing a bundle from one of the pockets of the large waterproof, proceeded to dress himself anew. As soon as he was dressed, he spread the waterproof out on the ground, folded up in it the clothes and hat he had previously been wearing, added a number of heavy stones, and tied the whole bundle up with a piece of string. He swung it once or twice at the full length of his arm, and sent it hurtling right into the middle of the river, where it sank at once. A few minutes later, a bricklayer in his working clothes presented himself at the Juvisy booking office. "A workman's ticket to Paris, please, missus," he said, and having got it, the man went on to the departure platform. "It would have been risky to use my own ticket," he muttered. "This return ticket will put them off the scent," and with a smile he waited for the train that would take him to Paris. The slow train from Luchon was drawing near its Paris terminus, and the travellers were all making hasty toilettes and tidying themselves up after their long night's journey. Just, however, as it was approaching the goods station, it slowed down and stopped. The passengers, surprised, put their heads out of the windows to ascertain the reason for the unexpected delay, hazarding various conjectures, but unanimous in their vituperation of the company. 3 men were walking slowly along the line, looking carefully at every door. 2 were porters, and they were manifesting the most respectful attention to everything the third man said. He was a grave individual, very correctly attired. "Look there, sir!" one of the porters exclaimed. "There is a door where the safety catch has either been undone or not fastened. That is the only one on the train." "That is so," said the gentleman, and grasping the handle he opened the door of the compartment and got in. 2 travellers were busy strapping up their bags, and they turned round in simultaneous surprise. "You will pardon me, gentlemen, when you know who I am," said the intruder, and throwing open his coat he showed his tricolour scarf. "I have to make inquiry relative to a dead body that has been found on the line near Bretagne. It probably fell from this train, and perhaps from this compartment, for I have just observed that the safety catch is not fastened. Where did you get into the train?" The 2 passengers looked at one another in astonishment. "What a dreadful thing!" one of them exclaimed. "Why, sir, tonight, while my friend here and I were asleep, one of our fellow travellers did disappear. I made a remark about it, but this gentleman very reasonably pointed out that he must have got out at some station while we were asleep." The official was keenly interested. "What was this passenger like?" "Quite easily recognised, sir. A man of about 60, rather stout, and wearing whiskers." "That tallies with the description. Might he have been a butler or a steward?" "That is exactly what he looked like." "Then that must be the man whose body has been found upon the line. But I do not know whether it is to be regarded as a case of suicide or of murder, for some hand baggage has been picked up as well. A suicide would not have thrown his luggage out, and a thief would not have wanted to get rid of it." The passenger who had not yet spoken broke in. "You are wrong, sir. At any rate, all his luggage was not thrown onto the line, and he pointed to the bundle left upon the seat. I thought that belonged to the gentleman here, but he has just told me it isn't his." The official rapidly unfastened the straps and started back. "Hullo? A bottle of liquid carbonic acid? Now what does that mean?" He looked at it. Did this bundle belong to the man who disappeared? The two passengers shook their heads. "I don't think so," one of them said. "I should certainly have noticed that Scotch rug, but I did not see it." "Then there was a fourth passenger in this compartment?" the official enquired. "No, we are travelling alone," said one of the men, but the other dissented. "It is very odd, and I am not sure about it, but I really am wondering whether someone did not get into our compartment last night while we were asleep. I have a vague impression that someone did, but I can't be sure." "Do try to remember, sir," the official urged him. "It is of the very highest importance." But the passenger shook his shoulders doubtfully. "No, I really can't say anything definite, and besides, I have a shocking headache." The official was silent for a minute or two. "In my opinion, gentlemen, you have been uncommonly lucky to escape murder yourselves. I do not quite understand yet how the murder was done, but I incline to think it proves almost incredible daring. However—" He stopped and put his head out of the window. "You can send the train on now," he called to the porter, and resumed. "However, I must ask you to accompany me to the station master's office, and give me your names and addresses, and to help me afterwards in the conduct of the legal investigation." The two travellers looked at one another in distressed surprise. "It is really appalling," said one of them. "You're not safe anywhere nowadays." "You really aren't," the other agreed. "Such a number of awful murders and crimes are being perpetrated every day that you would think not one but a dozen Fantômas were at work." End of chapter 26. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com. 7 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranstoun, Metcalfe. Chapter 27. 3 Surprising Incidents. Nibet went off duty at 5 in the morning and returned to his own home to go to bed. As a general rule he slept like a top after a night on duty, but on this occasion he could not close an eye, being far too uneasy about the consequences of his cooperation in Gurn's escape. A few minutes before 6 in the evening he had taken advantage of no warders being about to slip Gurn from cell number 127 to cell number 129, whence he could make his way to the roof. At 6, when he actually came on duty, Nibet opened the peephole in the door of number 127, as he did in all the others, and saw that Gurn had made an admirable dummy figure in the bed. It was so good that it even deceived a head warder, who made a single rapid inspection of all the cells when Nibet was on one of his several rounds during the night. Obviously Gurn must have got clear away from the prison, for if he had been caught, it would certainly have become generally known. These reflections somewhat comforted the restless man, but he knew that the most difficult part of his task was still before him. The difficulty of simulating astonishment and distress when he should get back to the prison presently and be told by his fellow warders of the prisoner's escape, and the difficulty of answering in a natural manner to the close interrogation to which he would be subjected by the governor and the police, and possibly even M. Fuselier, who would be in a fine rage when he learned that his captive had escaped him. Nibet meant to pretend ignorance and even stupidity. He would far rather be called a fool than found out to be a knave and an accomplice. About 11:30 Nibet got up. Gurn's escape must certainly be known at the prison by this time. The warder on duty would have gone to the cell about 7 to wake the prisoner, and though nothing might have been detected then, the cell would infallibly have been found to be empty at 8 o'clock, when the morning broth was taken round, and then— As he walked from his home round to the prison, Nibet met the gang of masons coming out for dinner. He crossed the street towards them, hoping to hear some news, but they passed by him in silence, one or two of them giving a careless nod or word of greeting. At first Nibet took their silence for a bad sign, thinking they might have been warned to give him no alarm. but he reflected that if Gurn's escape were discovered, as it surely must be, the authorities would probably prefer not to let the matter become widely known. As he reached the porter's lodge, his heart beat violently. What would old Morin have to tell him? But old Morin was very busy trying to make his kitchen fire burn properly instead of sending all the smoke pouring out into the room. The old man's slovenly figure was just visible in a clearing in the smoke, and he returned Nibet's salutation with nothing more than a silent salute. "That's funny," thought Nibet, and he passed through the main courtyard toward the clerk's offices at the end. Through the windows he could see the staff, a few bending over their work, most of them reading newspapers, none of them obviously interested in anything special. Next he presented himself before the warder's turnkey, and again he was allowed to pass on without a word. By this time Gurn's accomplice was in a state of such nervous tension that he could hardly restrain himself from catching hold of one or other of the warders whom he saw at their work and asking them questions. How could the escape of so important a prisoner as the man who had murdered Lord Beltham create so little excitement as this? Nibet longed to rush up the flights of stairs to number 127 and interrogate the warder who had gone on duty after himself, and whom he was now about to relieve in turn. He must surely know all about it, but it would not do to create suspicion, and Nibet had sufficient self-control left to go upstairs at his usual leisurely pace. Outwardly calm and steady, he reached his post just as the clock was striking 12. He was ever punctuality itself, and he was due on duty at noon. "Well, Colas," he said to his colleague, "here I am, you can go now." "Good," said the warder, "I'll be off at once. I'm on again at 6 tonight," and he moved away. "Everything all right?" Nibet inquired, in a tone he tried to make as casual as possible, but that trembled a little nevertheless. "Quite," said Colas, perfectly naturally, and he went away. Nibet could contain himself no longer, and the next second he threw caution to the winds. Rushing to Gurn's cell, he flung the door open. Gurn was there, sitting on the foot of his bed, with his legs crossed and a notebook on his knees, making notes with the quietest attention. He scarcely appeared to notice Nibet's violent invasion. "Oh, so you are there?" stammered the astonished warder. Gurn raised his head and looked at the warder with a cryptic gaze. "Yes, I'm here." All manner of notions crowded through Nibet's brain, but he could find words for none of them. Had the plot been discovered before Gurn had had time to get away, or had a trap been laid for himself through the medium of one of the prisoners to test his own incorruptibility? Nibet went white and leaned against the wall for support. At last Gurn spoke again, reassuring him with a smile. "Don't look so miserable," he said. "I am here. That is a matter of absolutely no importance. We will suppose that nothing passed between us yesterday, and that's an end to it." "So you haven't gone? You didn't go?" said Nibet again. "No," Gurn replied. "Since you are so interested, all I need say is that I was afraid to risk it at the last minute." Nibet had cast a keen and experienced eye all over the cell. Under the washstand he saw the little bundle of clothes which he had brought the prisoner the previous day. He rightly opined that the first thing to do was to remove these dangerous articles, whose presence in Gurn's cell would appear very suspicious if they happened to be discovered. He took the bundle and was hurriedly stowing it away under his own clothes, when he uttered an exclamation of surprise. The things were wet, and he knew from his own experience that the rain had never ceased throughout the whole of the night. "Gurn," he said reproachfully, "you are up to some trick. These things are soaked. You must have gone out last night, or these things would not be like this." Gurn smiled sympathetically at the warder. "Not so bad," he remarked. "That's pretty good reasoning for a mere jailer." And as Nibet was about to press the matter, Gurn anticipated his questions and made frank confession. "Well, yes, I did try to get out. Got as far as the clerk's office last evening, but at the last minute I funked it, and went back onto the roof. But when I got into number 129 again, I found I could not get back into my own cell, for, as you know, 129 was locked outside. So to avoid detection I returned to the roof and spent the night there. At daybreak I took advantage of the little disturbance caused by the workmen coming in, and slipped down from the roof just as they were going up. As soon as I found myself on this floor, I ran along this corridor and slipped into my own cell. When your friend Colas brought me my broth, he did not notice that my cell was unlocked. And there you are." The explanation was not altogether convincing, but Nibet listened to it and pondered the situation. On the whole, it was much better that things should be as they were, but the warder was wondering how the great lady, who paid so mighty well, might take the matter. She most certainly had not promised so large a sum of money, nor paid the good round sum of 10,000 francs down in advance, merely in order that Gurn might have a little walk upon the tiles. What was to be done with regard to that personage? With much ingenuousness, Nibet confided his anxiety to the prisoner, who laughed. "It is not all over yet," he declared. "Indeed, it is only just beginning. What if we only wanted to test you and prove your quality? Make your mind easy, Nibet. If Gurn is in prison at the present moment, it is because he has his own reasons for being there. But who is able to predict the future?" It was time for Gurn to go to the exercise yard, and Nibet, reassuming the uncompromising attitude that all warders ought to maintain when in custody of prisoners, led the murderer down to the courtyard. In his office at the law courts, M. Fuselier was having a private interview with Juve, and listening with much interest to what the clever detective inspector was saying to him. "I tell you again, sir, I attach great importance to the finding of this ordnance map in Gurn's rooms." "Yes," said M. Fuselier, with a touch of scepticism. "And I will tell you why," Juve went on. "About a year ago, when I was engaged on the case of the murder of the Marquise de Langrune at her château at Beaulieu, down in Lot, I found a small piece of a map showing the district in which I was at the time. I took it to M. de Presles, the magistrate who was conducting the inquiry. He attached no importance to it, and I myself could not see at the time that it gave us any new evidence." "Quite so," said M. Fuselier. "There is nothing particularly remarkable in finding a map, or a piece of a map showing a district in the district itself." "Those are M. de Presles' very words to me," said Juve with a smile, "and I will give you the same answer I gave him, namely, that if some day we could find the other portion of the map which completed the first piece we found, and could identify the owner of the two portions, there would then be a formal basis on which to proceed to base an argument." "Proceed to base it," M. Fuselier suggested. "That's very easy," said Juve. "The fragment of map numbered 1, found at Beaulieu, belongs to X. I do not know who X is. But in Paris, in Gurn's rooms, I find a fragment of a map numbered 2, which belongs to Gurn. If it turns out, as I expect, that the two fragments of map, when placed together, form a single and complete whole, I shall conclude logically that X, who is the owner of the fragment number 1, is the same as the owner of fragment number 2, to wit, Gurn." "How are you going to find out?" inquired M. Fuselier. "It is in order to find out that we have sent for Dollon," Juve replied. "He was steward to the late Marquise de Langrune, and has all the circumstantial evidence relating to that case. If he has still got the fragment of map, it will be simplicity itself to prove what I have suggested, and perhaps to make the identification I suggest." "Yes," said M. Fuselier, "but if you do succeed, will it be of really great importance in your opinion? Will you be able to infer from that one fact that Gurn and the man who murdered the Marquise de Langrune are one and the same person? Is not that going rather far? Especially as, if I remember rightly, it was proved that the murderer in that case was the son of a M. Rambert, and this young Rambert committed suicide after the crime." Juve evaded the issue. "Well, we shall see," was all he said. The magistrate's clerk came into the room and unceremoniously interrupted the conversation. "It has gone past 2, sir," he said. "There are some prisoners to examine, and a whole lot of witnesses," and he placed 2 bulky bundles of papers before the magistrate and waited for a sign to call the various persons, free or otherwise, whom the magistrate had to see. The first bundle caught Juve's attention. It was endorsed Royal Palace Hotel Case. "Anything new about the robbery from Mme. Van den Rosen and Princess Sonia Danidoff?" he inquired, and as the magistrate shook his head, he added, "Are you going to examine Muller now?" "Yes," said the magistrate, "at once." "And after that you are going to examine Gurn, aren't you, in connection with the Beltham case?" "Quite so." "I wish you would oblige me by confronting the 2 men here in my presence." Monsieur Fuselier looked up in surprise. He could not see what connection there could be between the two utterly dissimilar cases. What object could Juve have in wanting the man who had murdered Lord Beltham to be confronted with the unimportant little hotel servant who had really been arrested rather as a concession to public opinion than because he was actually deemed capable of burglary or attempted burglary? Might not Juve, with his known mania for associating all crimes with each other, be going just a little too far in the present instance? "You have got some idea in the back of your head?" said M. Fuselier. "I've got a scar in the palm of my hand," Juve answered with a smile, and as the magistrate confessed that he failed to understand, Juve enlightened him. "We know that the man who did that robbery at the Royal Palace Hotel burned his hand badly when he was cutting the electric wires in the Princess's bathroom. Well, a few weeks ago, while I was on the lookout for someone with a scar from such a wound, I was told of a man who was prowling around the slums. I had the fellow followed up, and the very night the hunt began I was going to arrest him, when, a good deal to my surprise, I discovered that he was no other than Gurn. He escaped me that first time, but when he was caught later on I found that he has an unmistakable scar inside the palm of his right hand. It is fading now, for the burn was only superficial, but it is there. Now do you see my idea?" "Yes, I do," the magistrate exclaimed, "and I am all the more glad to hear of it, since I am to have both the men here now. Shall I have Muller in first?" Juve assented. "So you still refuse to confess," said the magistrate at last. "You still maintain that your extraordinary order to let the red-haired waiter out was given in good faith?" Yes, sir," the night watchman answered. "That very evening a new servant had joined the staff. I had not even set eyes on him. When I saw this stranger, I took him to be the servant who had been engaged the day before, and I told them to open the door for him. That is the real truth." "And that is all?" "That is positively all." "We are only charging you with complicity," the magistrate went on, "for the man who touched the electric wires burned his hand. That is a strong point in your favour. And you also say that if the thief were put before you, you could recognise him?" "Yes," said the man confidently. "Good," said M. Fuselier, and he signed to his clerk to call in another personage. The clerk understood, and Gurn was brought in between two municipal guards, and was followed by the young licentiate in law, Maître Roger de Serres, who represented his leader at most of the preliminary examinations. As Gurn came in, with the light from the window falling full on his face, M. Fuselier gave a curt order. "Muller, turn around and look at this man." Muller obeyed, and surveyed with some bewilderment, and without the least comprehension, the bold head and the well-built muscular frame of Lord Beltham's murderer. Gurn did not flinch. "Do you recognise that man?" the magistrate demanded. Muller ransacked his brains, and looked again at Gurn, then shook his head. "No, sir." "Gurn, open your right hand," the magistrate ordered. "Show it," and he turned again to Muller. "The man before you seems to have been burned in the palm of the hand, as that scar shows. Can you not remember having seen that man at the Royal Palace Hotel?" Muller looked steadily at Gurn. "On my honour, sir, although it would be in my interest to recognise him, I am bound to acknowledge that I really and truly don't." M. Fuselier had a brief conversation aside with Juve, and then, the detective appearing to agree with him, turned once more to the night watchman. "Muller," he said, "the court is pleased with your frankness. You will be set free provisionally, but you are to hold yourself at the disposal of the court of enquiry." And he signed to the municipal guards to lead the gratefully protesting man away. Meanwhile Gurn's case appeared to him to be becoming much more serious, and much more interesting. He had the prisoner placed in front of him, while Juve, who had withdrawn into a dark corner of the room, never took his eyes off the murderer. "Gurn," he began, "can you give me an account of your time during the second half of December of last year?" Gurn was unprepared for the point-blank question, and made a gesture of doubt. M. Fuselier, probably anticipating a sensation, was just on the point of ordering Dollon to be called, when he was interrupted by a discreet tap on the door. His clerk went to answer it, and saw a gendarme standing at the door. At almost the first words he said, The clerk uttered an exclamation and wheeled round to the magistrate. "Oh, Monsieur Fuselier, listen! They have just told me—" But the gendarme had come in. He saluted the magistrate and handed him a letter, which M. Fuselier hastily tore open and read. To M. Germain Fuselier, examining magistrate, the Law Courts, Paris. The Special Commissioner at Brétigny Station has the honour to report that this morning at 8 a.m. the police informed him of the discovery on the railway line, 5 kilometres from Brétigny on the Orléans side, of the dead body of a man who must either have fallen accidentally or been thrown intentionally from a train bound for Paris. The body had been mutilated by a train travelling in the other direction, but papers found on the person of the deceased, and in particular a summons found in your pocket, showed that his name was Allain, and he was on his way to Paris to wait upon you. The Special Commissioner at Brétigny Station has, quite late, been informed of the following facts. Passengers who left the train on its arrival at the Austerlitz terminus at 5 a.m. were examined by the Special Commissioner at that station and subsequently allowed to go. Possibly you have already been informed. We have, however, thought it our duty, after having searched the body, to report this identification to you, and have therefore requisitioned an officer of the police at Brétigny to convey to you the information contained in this communication. M. Fuselier had turned pale as he read this letter. He handed it to Juve. With feverish haste the famous detective read it through and wheeled round to the gendarme. "Tell me, do you know what has been done? Do you know if this man's papers, all his papers, were found and have been preserved?" The man shook his head in ignorance. Juve clasped the magistrate's hand. "I'm off to Brétigny this instant," he said in a low tone. Throughout this incident, Maître Roger de Serres had remained in a state of blank incomprehension. Gurn's face was more expressionless and imperturbable than ever. End of chapter 27. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Boomcoach.blogspot.com 28 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranstoun, Metcalfe. Chapter 28. The Court of Assize. "Call Lady Beltham." It was a perfect May day, and everyone who could pretend on any conceivable ground to belong to Paris had schemed and intrigued to obtain admission to a trial over which public opinion had been excited for months, the trial of Gurn for the murder of Lord Beltham, ex-ambassador and foremost man of fashion, whose murder 2 years before had caused a great sensation. The preliminary formalities of the trial had furnished nothing to tickle the palates of the sensation-loving crowd. The indictment had been almost inaudible, and besides, it contained nothing that had not already been made public by the press, nor had the examination of the prisoner been any more interesting. Gurn sat, strangely impassive, in the dock between 2 municipal guards, and hardly listened to his counsel, the eminent Maître Barbereau, who was assisted by a galaxy of juniors, including young Roger de Serres. Moreover, Gurn had frankly confessed his guilt almost immediately after his arrest. There was not much for him to add to what he had said before, although the president of the court pressed him as to some points which were not satisfactorily clear with respect to his own identity, and the motives which had prompted him to commit his crime, and subsequently to pay that most risky visit to Lady Beltham, at the close of which Juve had effected his arrest. But Lady Beltham's evidence promised to be much more interesting. Rumour had been busy for a long time with the great lady and her feelings, and odd stories were being whispered. She was said to be beautiful, wealthy and charitable. People said, under their breath, that she must know a good deal about the murder of her spouse, and when she made her appearance in the box, a sudden hush fell upon the crowded court. She was indeed a most appealing figure, robed in long black weeds, young, graceful and very pale, so sympathetic a figure that scandal was forgotten in the general tense desire to hear her answers to the president of the court. Following the usher to the witness box, She took off her gloves as desired, and, in a voice that trembled slightly but was beautifully modulated, repeated the words of the oath, with her right hand raised the while. Noticing her agitation, the President mitigated somewhat the harshness of the tone in which he generally spoke to witnesses. "Pray compose yourself, madam. I am sorry to be obliged to subject you to this examination, but the interests of justice require it. Come now, you are Lady Beltham, widow of the late Lord Beltham, of English nationality, residing in Paris at your own house in Neuilly?" "Yes." "Will you kindly turn round, madam, and tell me if you know the prisoner in the dock?" Lady Beltham obeyed mechanically. She glanced at Gurn, who paled a little, and answered the President. "Yes, I know the prisoner. His name is Gurn." "Very good, madam. Can you tell me first of all how you came to be acquainted with him?" "When my husband was in South Africa, at the time of the Boer War, Gurn was a sergeant in the regular army. It was then that I first met him." "Did you know him well at that time?" Lady Beltham seemed to be unable to prevent herself from casting long glances at the prisoner. She appeared to be almost hypnotized and frightened by his close proximity. "I saw very little of Gurn in the Transvaal," she answered. "It was just by chance that I learned his name, but of course the difference between his own rank and my husband's position made the relations that I could have with a mere sergeant very limited indeed." "Yes, Gurn was a sergeant," the President said. "And after the war, madam, did you see the prisoner again?" "Yes. Immediately after the war, my husband and I went to England by the same boat on which Gurn went home." "Did you see much of him on board?" "No. We were first-class passengers, and he, I believe, went second. It was just by accident that my husband caught sight of him soon after the boat sailed." The President paused and made a note. "Were those all the relations your husband had with the prisoner?" "They are at any rate all the relations I had with him," Lady Beltham replied in tones of some distress. "But I know that my husband employed Gurn on several occasions to help him in various affairs and matters of business." "Thank you," said the President. "We will return to that point presently. Meanwhile, there is one question I should like to ask you. If you had met the prisoner in the street a few months ago, would you have recognised him? Was his face still distinct in your memory, or had it become blurred and vague?" Lady Beltham hesitated, then answered confidently. "I am sure I should not have recognised him, and some proof of this is that, just before his arrest was effected, I was conversing with the prisoner for several minutes, without having the faintest idea that the poor man with whom I imagined I had to do was no other than the man Gurn for whom the police were looking." The President nodded, and Maître Barberoux leaned forward and spoke eagerly to his client in the dock. But the President continued immediately. "You must forgive me, madam, for putting a question that may seem rather brutal, and also for reminding you of the oath to tell us the entire truth. Did you love your husband?" Lady Beltham quivered and was silent for a moment, as though endeavouring to frame a right answer. "Lord Beltham was much older than myself," she began, and then, perceiving the meaning implicit in her words, she added, "I had the very highest esteem for him, and a very real affection." A cynical smile curled the lip of the President, and he glanced at the jury as though asking them to pay still closer attention. "Do you know why I put that question to you?" he asked, and as Lady Beltham confessed her ignorance, he went on. "It has been suggested, madam, by a rumour which is very generally current in the newspapers and among people generally, that the prisoner may possibly have been greatly enamoured of you. That perhaps, well, is there any truth in this?" As he spoke, the President bent forward, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through Lady Beltham. "It is a wicked calumny," she protested, turning very pale. Throughout the proceedings Gurn had been sitting in an attitude of absolute indifference, almost of scorn, but now he rose to his feet and uttered a defiant protest. "Sir," he said to the President of the Court, "I desire to say publicly here that I have the most profound and unalterable respect for Lady Beltham. Anyone who has given currency to the malignant rumour that you refer to is a liar, I have confessed that I killed Lord Beltham, and I do not retract that confession. But I never made any attempt upon his honour, and no word, nor look, nor deed has ever passed between Lady Beltham and myself that might not have passed before Lord Beltham's own eyes." The President looked sharply at the prisoner. "Then tell me what was your motive in murdering your victim?" "I have told you already. Lady Beltham is not to be implicated in my deed in any way. I had constant business dealings with Lord Beltham. I asked him over the telephone to come to my place one day. He came. We had an animated discussion. He got warm and I answered angrily. Then I lost control of myself, and in a moment of madness I killed him. I am profoundly sorry for my crime and stoop to crave pardon for it, but I cannot tolerate the suggestion that the murder I committed was in the remotest way due to sentimental relations with a lady who is, I repeat, entitled to the very highest respect from the whole world." A murmur of sympathy ran through the court at this chivalrous declaration, by which the jury, who had not missed a word, seemed to be entirely convinced. But the President was trained to track truth in detail, and he turned again to Lady Beltham, who still stood in the witness box, very pale and swaying with distress. "You must forgive me if I attach no importance to a mere assertion, madam. The existence of some relations between yourself and the prisoner, which delicacy would prompt him to conceal, and honour would compel you to deny, would alter the whole aspect of this case." He turned to the usher. "Recall Mme. Doulenques, please." Mme. Doulenques considered it a tremendous honour to be called as witness in a trial with which the press was ringing, and was particularly excited because she had just been requested to pose for her photograph by a representative of her own favourite paper. She followed the usher to where Lady Beltham stood. "You told us just now, Mme. Doulenques," the President said suavely, "that your lodger Gurn often received visits from a lady friend. You also said that if this lady were placed before you, you would certainly recognise her. Now will you kindly look at the lady in the box? Is this the same person?" Mme. Doulenques, crimson with excitement, and nervously twisting in her hands a huge pair of white gloves, which she had bought for this occasion, looked curiously at Lady Beltham. "Upon my word, I can't be sure that this is the lady," she said, after quite a long pause. "But you were so certain of your facts just now," the President smiled encouragingly. "Well, I can't see the lady very well with all those veils on," Mme. Doulenques protested. Lady Beltham did not wait for the request which the President would inevitably have made, but haughtily put back her veil. "Do you recognise me now?" she said coldly. The scorn in her tone upset Mme. Doulenques. She looked again at Lady Beltham, and turned instinctively as if to ask enlightenment from Gurn, whose face, however, was expressionless, and then replied: "It's just what I told you before, your worship. I can't be sure. I couldn't swear to it." "But you think she is?" "You know, your worship," Mme. Doulenques protested, "I took an oath just now to tell the truth, and nothing but the truth, so I don't want to tell any stories. Well, this lady might be the same lady, and again she mightn't be." "In other words, you cannot give a definite answer." "That's it," said the concierge. "I don't know. I can't swear. This lady is like the other lady. There's a sort of family likeness between them, but at the moment I do not exactly recognise her. It's much too serious." Mme. Doulenques would willingly have continued to give evidence for ever and a day, but the President cut her short. "Very well, thank you," he said, and dismissed her with the usher, turning again meanwhile to Lady Beltham. "Will you kindly tell me now what your personal opinion is as to the relative culpability of the prisoner? Of course you understand that he has confessed to the crime, and your answer will bear chiefly on the motive that may have actuated him." Lady Beltham appeared to have recovered some of her confidence. "I cannot say anything definite, can only express a very vague feeling about the matter. I know my husband was quick-tempered, very quick-tempered, and even violent, and his peremptory temper disposed him to positive convictions. He maintained what he considered his rights at all times and against all comers. If, as the prisoner says, there was a heated discussion, I should not be surprised if my husband did make use of arguments that might have provoked anger." The President gently gave a clearer turn to the phrase she used. "So, in your opinion, the prisoner's version of the story is quite permissible? You admit that Lord Beltham and his murderer may have had a heated discussion, as a consequence of which Gurn committed his crime? This is your honest belief?" "Yes," Lady Beltham answered, trying to control her voice. "I believe that may be what took place. And then it is the only way in which I can find the least excuse for the crime this man Gurn committed." The President picked up the word in astonishment. "Do you want to find excuses for him, madame?" Lady Beltham stood erect and looked at the President. "It is written that to pardon is the first duty of good Christians. It is true that I have mourned my husband, but the punishment of his murderer will not dry my tears. I ought to forgive him, bow before the burden that is laid upon my soul, and I do forgive him." Ghastly pale, Gurn was staring at Lady Beltham from the dock, and this time his emotion was so visible that all the jury noticed it. The President held a brief colloquy with his colleagues, asked the prisoner's counsel whether he desired to put any questions to the witness, and receiving a reply in the negative, dismissed Lady Beltham with a word of thanks, and announced that the court would adjourn. Immediately a hum of conversation broke out in the warm and sunny court. Barristers in their robes moved from group to group, criticising, explaining, prophesying, and in their seats the world of beauty and fashion bowed and smiled and gossiped. "She's uncommonly pretty, this Lady Beltham," one young lawyer said, "and she's got a way of answering questions without compromising herself, and yet without throwing blame on the prisoner, that is uncommonly clever." "You are all alike, you men," said a pretty, perfectly well-dressed woman in mocking tones. "If a woman is young, and hasn't got a hump on her back, and has a charming voice, your sympathies are with her at once. Oh yes, they are. Now shall I tell you what your Lady Beltham really is? Well, she's nothing more nor less than a barnstormer. She knew well enough how to get on the soft side of the judge, who was quite ridiculously amiable to her, and to capture the sympathy of the court. I think it was outrageous to declare that she had married a man who was too old for her, and to say that she felt nothing but esteem for him." "There's an admission," the young barrister laughed. "Vive l'amour, eh? And marriage de convenance are played out, eh?" On another bench a little farther away, a clean-shaven man with a highly intelligent face was talking animatedly. "Bosh! Your Lady Beltham is anything you like. What do I care for Lady Beltham? I shall never play woman's part, shall I? She does not stand for anything. But Gurn, now! There's a type, if you like. What an interesting, characteristic face! He has the head of the assassin of genius, with perfect mastery of self, implacable, cruel, malignant, a Torquemada of a man." "Your enthusiasm is running away with you," someone laughed. "I don't care. It is so seldom one comes across figures in a city that really are figures, entities. That man is not an assassin, he is the assassin, the type." Two ladies, sitting close to this enthusiast, had been listening keenly to this diatribe. "Do you know who that is?" one whispered to the other. "That is Valgrand, the actor." And they turned their lorgnettes on the actor, who was waxing more animated every moment. A bell rang and, heralded by the usher proclaiming silence, the judges returned to the bench and the jury to their box. The President cast an eagle eye over the court, compelling silence, and then resumed the proceedings. "Next witness, call Monsieur Juve." End of chapter 28. Recording by Alan Winterrowd. Boomcoach.blogspot.com